a basic precept in any legal system which recognizes equality of all men before the law as essential to the law's moral authority and that of its agents to secure respect for and obedience to its commands. Perhaps there is no other government branch or instrumentality that is most zealous in protecting that principle of legal equality other than the Supreme Court, which has discerned in its meaning and ramifications through its application of numerous cases, especially the high-profile kind in the annals of jurisprudence. The Filipino nation and its democratic institutions have no doubt been put to a test once again by this impeachment case. Accordingly, the court resorted to no other than the Constitution in search for a solution to what many feared would ripen to a crisis in government. Sa muli, magandang gabi po sa ating lahat. Hindi ko po salita mga sinambit ko na ilang minuto. Yung po ay paraphrase at halos eksaktong quotation ng salita ni dating Justice Conchita Carpio Morales sa Francisco ruling na kinatigan ng mayoriya ng mga miyembro ng Korte Suprema, kabilang na si dating Chief Justice Puno, dating Justice Carpio, dating Justice Ascuna, dating Justice Panganiban. Ano nga ba itong Francisco ruling na pinag-uusapan natin ito? Ano nga ba ang pinagkapareho, pinagkaiba nito sa kasalukuyan nating hinaharap? At bakit ko ba ito tinatanong? Ginoong Pangulo, bahagi ako ng Kongresong nagtangka na i-impeach si dating Chief Justice Davide. Bakit ko sinabing tangka? Dahil pinigilan po kami ng Korte Suprema. In-enjoin at nag-issue ng TRO ang Korte Suprema at ito yung desisyong yun. Francisco, case na palaging sinaside po natin. Ano bang pinagkapareho? Ang aligasyon laban sa nasasakdal noon na si Chief Justice Davide, kaugnay din ng corruption. Daang milyon din. Ang pinag-usapan, initiation of impeachment na dapat sole prerogative din ng Kamara. Ang pinag-usapan, ano bang definisyon ng initiation na dapat sole jurisdiction din ng Kamara? Ang tanong ko po ay
shout out sa lahat.
Noong mga panahon yun,
Ongoing guys ang butuhan kung tuloy pa ba ang impeachment o hindi na.
Sa desisyon ng Korte Suprema. Yung mga maestrado
Nasa letter E na.
retirado na, bumoto sila pabor doon. Subalit ngayon, tila nag-iba ang posisyon. Ano nga ba ang pinagkaiba kung meron man? Klaro ang pinagkaiba. Iba ang pangalan ng nasasakdal. Today, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the very supremacy of the Supreme Court is being called into question, and with it, the very foundation of the rule of law. As Senate President and as a member of this chamber, and as a member of the bar, I will not sit idly by.
Butuhan, kung tuloy pa ba ang impeachment o hindi na.
Be governed by laws that apply to all, equally to all.
Load muna tayo.
The whims and caprices of public opinion.
Yan ang explanation of votes.
Justice Frankfurter once said, if one man can be allowed to determine for himself what is law,
Explanation of
every man
votes.
can. That means first chaos, then tyranny. Legal process is an essential part of democratic process. Whether it's a mob or a minority, bias and prejudice blinds, divides, and destroys. Former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor also said it best. The law provides necessary continuity amidst our constantly shifting political landscape. It guarantees everyone will be treated equally, whether they are in today's or yesterday's majority, so they know what to expect, whether what they do is popular or unpopular at the time. The courts, Mr. President, with the Supreme Court at the helm, are the guardians of the rule of law, making sure everyone plays by the same rules and receives equal justice. For the rule of law to prevail, the High Court must act as a compass, not as a political cheerleader, impartially applying the law by calling out violations, not swayed by public opinion or political allegiance. Respect for the rule of law, Mr. President, requires all of us to adhere to final or immediately executory decisions of the court, even when there is a winner and a loser, to avoid deadlocks and maintain legal order. Respect for the rule of law does not bar disagreeing with court decisions, nor from forming our own opinions on the meaning and intent and letter of the spirit of the Constitution. However, we must also have the humility to accept we are wrong once the Supreme Court has already decided. Respecting the court only when you win or when it aligns with your belief is not respect for me. It is plain arrogance, or if at all, a power play. Cherry-picking court rulings destroys the judiciary's purpose. Disobeying the High Court's decision is a violation of the law because under our
Oo
Constitution,
nga, mami, si
decisions
Marcoleta
of
na ang
the
chairman
Supreme
ng Blue
Court
Ribbon.
form part of the law of the land. I make these remarks, Mr. President, amidst recent calls for this august body to disregard the Supreme Court's recent ruling in Duterte v. HOR. These calls for judicial disobedience have been aided and abetted by so-called legal luminaries and experts who fancy their wisdom and knowledge of the Constitution as better, higher, more supreme than that of the Supreme Court. Miyembro po ba sila ng Supremist Court? Miyembro po ba sila ng Super Supreme Court? Sa pagkakalam ko po, iisa lamang ang Korte Suprema. At ayon sa ating konstitusyon, Korte Suprema ang bukod tanging pwedeng makapagsabi kung ano ang kahulugan ng ating saligang batas. Walang iba. Allow me to demonstrate, for example, Mr. President, the legal gymnastics these people have been undertaking. In the past, and I have borne the brunt of this, sabi nila, forthwith ang sinabi sa Senado, ibig sabihin yan agad-agad. Despite the rulings of the Supreme Court that say it is within a reasonable time. Pero ito na tayo sa agad-agad. Sabi ng rules ng House, dapat i-refer ng SecGen immediately sa Speaker. 2 buwan bago niya ginawa yun. Oh, okay lang sa kanila. Hindi naman sila nagreklamo. Immediately po ang gamit, ha? Hindi forthwith. Sabi naman ngayon ng Korte Suprema, immediately executory. Ay, teka lang. Hintayin muna natin. Hindi ba final? Kapag ka-convenienteng gamitin yung mga salita pabor sa posisyon nila, edi okay lang. Kapag ka hindi naman, ay hindi rin. Hindi po ganun dapat yun. Hinihiling nila ngayon sa Senado na ipagpaliban muna ang anumang aksyon para intayin ang anumang desisyon ito kaugnay sa motion for reconsideration na inihain ng Kamara sa Korte Suprema. Subalit tulad ng naipaliwanag na kanina kaugnay ng motion na pinagbobotohan natin ngayon, kung magbago man ang Korte Suprema sa kanilang desisyon na unanimous noong July 25, 2025, meron pong paraan at proseso pa ang Senado para sundin ang bagong desisyon yan ng Korte Suprema kung sakasakaling mangyayari po yan. In the past, it was also said, nauna nagsalita si Senator Bato, bawal daw at walang karapatan mag-motion ang sino mang senator judge dahil trabaho daw ng depensa yon. Eh bakit yung mga parehong tao yung pinag-uusapan? Dapat magkain tayo ng motion for reconsideration. Hindi ba trabaho din ng prosecution yon? Hindi naman po pwede na pwede lang pag kayo, hindi na pwede pag iba. Now the prosecution has actually filed a motion for reconsideration, and rightfully so, and not by this chamber. Noon kapag nung bumoto kami para i-remand ang impeachment complaint sa Kamara, pinapaboran daw namin yung nasasakdal. Sinabi ko na rin yan, na yung kontra sa impeachment at pabor sa impeachment, hindi ko didinggin. Na yung kontra at pabor kay Vice President Sara Duterte, hindi ko didinggin. Dahil may rason kung bakit babaeng nakapiring ang mata ang simbolo ng ating hustisya na humahawak ng espada sa kabilang kamay at panimbang sa kabilang kamay. Dahil wala po dapat kinikilala ang hustisya na personalidad. Sino man ang nasasakdal, dapat pareho lamang po ang ating mga magiging desisyon. Sabi din nila, will of the people daw ito. Eh sino ba si people? Balikan po natin ang naging desisyon ng Korte Suprema. Ayon sa desisyon ng Korte Suprema sa panunulat ni Justice Malcolm sa Alejandrino versus Manuel Quezon, pinag-aaralan po ito ng mga first-year law students. Quote, the judiciary under its powers to interpret the Constitution and the laws has the duty and the right to declare what the will of the people is as expressed in the fundamental law of the land. Hence, where the acts of the executive or legislative legislative departments violate the will of the people as expressed in the organic law of the land, it is the sworn duty of the judiciary to interpret and to declare that will of the people and the right of the citizen has been violated and or transgressed. Allow me to answer a few more, Mr. President, Your Honor. As I stated earlier, sabi ng ilan, hintayin natin na ma-resolvehan ng motion for reconsideration. Pero dun sa parehong araw na nag-hain ng motion for reconsideration ng Kamara, nagsalita ang tagapagsalita ng Korte Suprema at sinabing immediately executory pa rin ang desisyon. Sinahid ko rin kanina ang Section 1, Rule 16, AM number 10-4-20 ng Supreme Court na nagsasabi na ang resolusyon ay magiging executory lamang kapag ka ito'y nagkaroon ng entry of judgment maliban na lang kung sinabi sa desisyon na ito'y immediately executory na siyang nangyari sa kasong ito. Binanggit din kanina si Senator Cayetano ang Section 4, Rule 39 ng Rules of Court na nagsasabi na immediately executory ng mga desisyon ay hindi kailangan maghintay na maresolbahan anumang apela o motion for reconsideration na nakabinbin. Ginagamit din ang operative fact doctrine. Ang operative fact doctrine po ay exception sa rule
Basta
ng
masasabi ko
null
lang,
and void
ituloy nyo yan.
ab initio. Ito po
Alin
ay
lang ito
hindi
tuloy,
rule,
love?
ito ay exception sa rule.
Wait lang ha.
Gamit po
Magsasalang lang ako
sinulat
ng
na
aking
desisyon ni
sinain.
Justice Tony Carpio sa League of Cities versus Comelec. Ito ang sinabi po niya.
Sasaing pala
The
ako.
invocation of the operative fact doctrine is an admission that the law or act is unconstitutional. Bago po natin din sabihin, gamitin natin to. Aminin niyo muna. Illegal at bawal
Susan,
ang ginawa ng
shoutout.
Kamara.
Bakit walo lang tayo nasa ng mga marites? Magkano?
It will open the floodgates to wanton enactment of unconstitutional laws and the commission of unconstitutional acts and a mad rush for their immediate implementation before the court can declare them unconstitutional. This view, according to him, is an open invitation to serially violate the Constitution and be quick about it, lest the violation be stopped by the court. Sinabi din po ni Justice Carpio sa desisyong Araujo versus Aquino, those who acted in bad faith with gross negligence cannot invoke this doctrine. Hindi po pwedeng pakinabangan.
Guys,
Yung
butuhan to
taong
ng
gumawa ng unconstitutional
Senado kung
na
tuloy pa ang
doktrina
impeachment.
ito, pwede lamang po itong gamitin ng mga partidong walang kinalaman dun sa ginawang mali, masama o di naaayon sa saligang batas. Ika nga, he who comes to equity must come with clean hands, and he who seeks equity must
Letter E.
likewise do equity.
Escudero. Sino ba sunod sa kanya?
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, kinondina din ng ilang legal luminaries tulad ng Philconsa na dating pinangunahan ng nanguna sa impeachment complaint na si Speaker Romualdez ilang taon lamang ang lumilipas na hindi daw bagong requirement daw ang due process. Dagdag daw ito. Mr. President, Your Honors, they should read Francisco again. They forgot that lack of due process in the impeachment process had been raised and in fact was specifically mentioned in the separate concurring opinions. And allow me to quote the concurring opinion of Justice Panganiban. The due process clause enshrined in our fundamental law is a condition sine qua non that cannot be ignored in any proceeding, administrative, judicial, or otherwise. It is then written into every law, rule, or contract, even though not expressly stated therein. Hence, the House rules on impeachment insofar as they do not provide the charged official with number 1, notice, and number 2, opportunity to be heard prior to being impeached are also unconstitutional. Needless to say, the due process limitation on the impeachment process was already discussed in Francisco. May pumalag ba nun? Wala. Yung nagre-reklamo ba ngayon kaugnay sa bagong requirement yung due process, nag-react nung sinulat ito at naging bahagi ng Francisco ruling? Hindi ko rin po napansin. Sinabi din po ng ilang legal luminary, partikular binanggit din ito ni Speaker Romualdez. When the court begins to create rules on how it and other high officials may be impeached, it risks writing the terms of its own immunity. This point was also discussed in Francisco. Ang sabi ng korte nito, illogical ito at non-sequitur. Alalahanin po natin. Hula lamang yung gagamitin din ito pabor sa kanila. Sa kaso ng Francisco, nakaupong Chief Justice ang nasasakdal. Pero sinabi mismo ng korte, hindi bale yan. Hindi namin pinapaboran ang kabaro namin sa pagbaba namin ng desisyong ito. Mr. President, the Constitution establishes a system of checks and balances, not a system of retribution. Threatening the Supreme Court with impeachment simply because one disagrees with the ruling is a dangerous assault on our constitutional order. The Senate, Mr. President, stands ready to uphold the integrity of the Constitution as well as the institutions created under it.
Kenneth Ramos, shout out.
We are told that to honor the court's ruling is to betray
Hindi
the
na
truth.
matutuloy ang impeachment
That by
ngayon,
choosing
February na.
fidelity to the law, we somehow abandon accountability, but nothing for me could be further from the truth. To disregard the ruling would not only defy the Constitution, it would drag the nation into a crisis it can ill afford. It would erode the authority of our laws, embolden those who believe they are above it because they know it all or simply know better. To those seeking to disregard the Supreme Court's decision, I ask these simple questions, Mr. President. Again, in light of the Francisco ruling on former Chief Justice Davide, and it was okay then because they did not want then Chief Justice Davide to be impeached. Are you truly for accountability or simply anti-Duterte? Do you truly respect and want to preserve the Constitution or you simply hate the Vice President? Are you serving the nation's interest or protecting and pursuing your own personal ambitions or agenda? Are you fighting for truth or are you simply after revenge? Do you really want a trial or do you just want a conviction? Do you really believe that we are wrong or do you simply think and feel entitled and believe that you are always right? Remove the name, Mr. President, of the Vice President in this case. Apply the decision of the High Court, as Senator Cayetano said earlier, to another impeachable official. Would your positions be the same? When I was faced with this situation, Mr. President, I respected the court's decision, even if I disagreed with it. I'm still voting to respect that court's decision. As quoted at the start of my speech, Mr. President, the dispensation of justice over the course of time should be unaffected, whomsoever stood to benefit or suffer therefrom. The courts should be unafraid of whatever imputations or speculations could be made against it by those disagreeing. I will not cast a vote that says complying with the Supreme Court ruling is optional. Anyone who will say, I will respect the Supreme Court today and condemn it tomorrow, is not showing fidelity to the Constitution. It is submission to the passions of the day, to the shifting winds of public sentiment that may or may not be just. Fidelity to the Constitution, Mr. President, must prevail even when it is unpopular, inconvenient, or misunderstood. In fact, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, it must prevail especially when it is unpopular, when it is inconvenient, and misunderstood. Finally, Mr. President, let today's verdict be a stern and unequivocal warning to anyone who would dare use the Senate for their personal battering ram to further their personal political ambitions. To the House of Representatives, I say, do not allow yourselves to be used for the blind hatred and ambition of a few who did things haphazardly, gravely abused their discretion, and violated due process rights under the Constitution as found by the High Court itself. In spite of all these, you expect everyone to roll over in obedience. When we did not, you moved hell and high water to destroy personalities, malign reputations, and tarnish institutions. To these people, I say this: the Senate is not your playground to run after your political enemies. We are not an accomplice in any grand scheme. While others may be willing to play your game, I am not. I will never bow to a mob. I will never cower to the shrillest of voices. Let history, Mr. President, record that in this moment, we chose the Constitution. We chose the rule of law by defending the integrity of the Supreme Court and maintaining the system of checks and balances under our Republican system of government. Let this chamber be remembered, not for the passions we inflamed, but for the principles we upheld. I vote yes to the motion, Mr. President. I vote yes to the rule of law, yes to the Constitution, yes to the supremacy of the Supreme Court in interpreting it.
Tatlo na ang yes. Tatlo na ang yes. Apat na ang yes. Yes. Pag sinabing yes, pabor na, i-dismiss na yung impeachment. Apat na ang yes. Wala pang buboto ng no.
Secretary will please continue to call the roll. Senator Estrada. For nominal voting. Senator Estrada is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues.
Naku naman to, magsasalita pa. Dapat hindi ka na magsalita. Bumoto ko na lang.
Justice Joseph Story warned that impeachment requires a lofty sense of duty,
MLM kapsat. Kape-kape.
responsibility to future times, as well as to God. His words remind us that we serve not only the present, but generations yet unborn, and that our actions must be anchored in constitutional fidelity and historical consciousness. With that solemn duty in mind, may I address the decision of our Supreme Court. Mr. President, the decision of the Supreme Court is very clear, that it left no doubt nor space for any other interpretation. Accordingly, I place on record my position in adhering to the Supreme Court's ruling, a decision that declared that the Senate did not acquire jurisdiction over the impeachment case against Vice President Sara Duterte because the complaint transmitted to us was null and void ab initio. Bakit natin ipinipilit ang isang bagay na malinaw na wala sa ating kapangyarihan? Nagsalita na po ang Korte Suprema. Hindi saklaw at walang jurisdiksyon ang Senado. Tapos na ang usapin. Patay na ang kaso. Mr. President, we must never forget that the Supreme Court is the final interpreter of our Constitution. It is not merely one of three co-equal branches. It is the guardian of the rule of law. If we, the very makers of law, choose to defy its authoritative interpretation, then we commit
Panoorin mo para makita mo yung boto.
on our democratic institutions.
Ganyan sa
and we
politika, mas magulo pa.
invite a constitutional crisis, a breakdown of checks and balances where anarchy replaces order and chaos becomes the norm. Mr. President, let us be clear. No one is above the law. Not the President, not the Vice President, not even the Senate when it sits as an impeachment court.
Maria Perez,
The
shout out.
Constitution is not just an ordinary law. It is the supreme law of the land. And if we betray to serve political passions or popular sentiment, then we betray the Republic itself. The Integrated Bar of the Philippines, in a statement, said that defying the High Court's ruling would, in effect, erode the very foundations of the legal order.
It's just on, shout out. Magpolitika muna tayo sandali.
Sounding like a broken record.
Ano to guys
I would like to say again that the Supreme
Controversial
Court
tong
is
botohan na
the
to sa
final
Senado.
interpreter of our Constitution. Tagapagpaliwanag ang Korte Suprema ng saligang batas. At kapag may hindi pagkakaintindihan kung paano dapat ipatupad, unawain ng batas, kabilang ang proseso ng impeachment, ang interpretasyon ng kataas-taasang hukuman ang siyang mananaig. Kaya naman, kapag nagsalita ng Korte Suprema, dapat itong
Hindi, it's just on ngayon lang.
at sundin ng lahat.
Makasaysayan to eh.
Ginoong Pangulo, batid natin na isang mahalagang mekanismo ang impeachment upang mapanagot ang pinakamatataas na opisyal ng pamahalaan
Pag sa politika kasi, iba-iba yung opinion natin.
sa kanilang posisyon.
Pero ngayon, kung hindi ka sang-ayon, no, manood lang tayo para makita nyo yung explanation ng boto.
Ay may pagkakataon para may pagtanggol.
Dito kasi makikita mo kung paano nila pinaliwanag yung kanilang boto, bakit sila bumuboto ng yes, na wala ng impeachment, no, na gusto pang matuloy.
Sa ligang batas na magsagawa nito, ang House of Representatives at ang Senado ay tumupad sa kanilang tungkulin ng may integridad at walang pagmamalabis sa kapangyarihang ipinagkaloob sa kanila. Hindi na sana dapat maulit ang pagkakamaling nasaksihan natin mahigit 2 dekada na ang nakalipas sa kaso ng aking ama, dating Pangulong Joseph Estrada. Kung inyong natatandaan, noong impeachment trial ng aking ama, pinagkaitan siya ng pagkakataon harapin ang mga paratang sa kanya dahil pinairal ang pansariling interes at hindi tumalima sa kanilang tungkulin ang mga prosecutors mula sa mababang kapulungan sapagkat nag-walk out po sila. Nakakadismaya, Ginoong Pangulo, na ganyan din ang nangyayari ngayon. Muli na naman nananaig ang pansariling interes. Matinding emosyon at inunang pamumulitika.
Yun na si Mada.
Ayan upang humantong tayo sa sitwasyong sinabi ng Korte Suprema na may malinaw na paglabag sa ating saligang batas. Had we decided to ignore the Supreme Court ruling and proceeded with the impeachment trial, we risk undermining the judiciary's role as the final arbiter of constitutional issues.
Ate Jade.
And this will definitely create a dangerous precedent where future legislatures could just bypass court rulings they deem unwarranted. Mr. President, my dear colleagues, there should be a balance of power among the 3 branches of government. And this representation does not wish the Senate to be in a direct collision course with the Supreme Court amid calls for us to proceed with the trial. I refuse to be a part of the Senate. I refuse to be part of a Senate that defies the law, disrespects the courts, and undermines the very system of justice we claim to uphold.
Tatandaan ko yan, Jinggoy ah.
Who insist on pressing forward, I ask these questions. If we cannot obey the law, do we still deserve to be called lawmakers? If we cannot respect the Constitution, do we still deserve the privilege of serving in public service? At kung ang Senado ay magmamatigas at hindi tutup din ang tuntunin ng batas, hindi ba tahas ang pagtalikod ito sa ating sinumpang tungkulin? Kung hindi natin kayang igalang ang batas na tayo mismo ang nagtatanggol, hindi na po tayo nararapat dito. Mr. President, political will, however passionate or burning within us, is not always the path we should take. There are moments when even our deepest convictions must kneel before the altar of the Constitution, when our desire for action must bow to the rule of law. Our strength as senators lies not in bending institutions to our will,
Shout
but
out,
in
Gov.
bending ourselves to the will
Hindi ko
of our
pinagbobotohan, ongoing ang botohan kung itutuloy pa ba ang impeachment o hindi na kay Sara. So nag-i-explain sila isa-isa ng boto nila. Yes, in favor na hindi na matutuloy no. Pag sinabing no, pag nagbumoto ko ng no, matutuloy pa yung impeachment.
Our legacy is a democracy that works.
Yes to dismiss, no to
By our willingness to submit to something
dismiss.
greater than our
Yun ang
feelings,
yun ang
our pride,
botohan.
our ego, our very selves. Mr. President, let history show that I chose principle over
Miss Pink
pressure,
Flower, shout out.
law over lawlessness, and country over partisanship. We are not shirking from our responsibility, but to fulfill our highest duty, to uphold the rule of law and to preserve the legitimacy of our institutions in accordance with the Constitution. Mr. President, let us act not with haste, but with honor. Let us preserve our republic not fracture it. I did not swear an oath to defend emotion. I swore an oath to defend our Constitution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Gatchalian.
Letter G
Senator
pa rin.
Gatchalian is recognized.
Letter
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, I rise today to cast my yes vote. Respecting the unanimous decision of the Supreme Court, which has declared the articles of impeachment filed by the House of Representatives unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has decided, and as public servants sworn to protect and defend the Constitution, our duty is to respect the Court's decision and abide by the ruling. Napaka-specific po ng sinabi ng Korte, void ab initio ang articles of impeachment. O sa madaling salita, as if walang nangyari. At immediately executory ang desisyon. Alam naman nating lahat, dapat natin sundin ang saligang batas. Hindi natin pinipili kung kailan natin gustong sundin. Hindi ito usapin ng opinyon o sariling interpretasyon. Ito ay obligasyon, pananagutan at tungkulin natin sa bansa at sa ating mga kababayan. From the very beginning, malinaw at consistent ang posisyon ko sa impeachment. Follow the law. Nung nagtipon tayo bilang impeachment court noong June 10 para magdesisyon kung ang articles of impeachment ay dapat bang ibalik sa mababang kapulungan. I voted no. I voted this way dahil importante po sa akin na mapag-usapan ang articles of impeachment sa konteksto ng isang legal, maayos at malinaw na impeachment trial. Ito ay naaayon sa mandato sa atin ng konstitusyon. Ayon sa Article 11, Section 3, Paragraph 6 ng ating saligang batas, the Senate shall have the sole power to try and decide all cases of impeachment. There is no room for ambiguity. Ito ang proseso ayon sa batas at ito ang ating tungkulin. Ang isang pundasyon ng konstitusyon ay ang separation of powers o ang pagkilala na ang bawat sangay ng gobyerno ay may kanya-kanyang kapangarihan at tungkulin. Ang executive, legislative at judiciary ay may kanya-kanyang mandato. At pagdating sa usaping konstitusyon, the final authority is the Supreme Court. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, this representation knows and respects that we have different perspectives on the verdict of the High Court and on the impeachment itself. Alam ko na marami tayong iba't ibang paniniwala at pagtingin sa batas. Pero alam ko na alam din nating lahat kung ano ang sinasabi ng konstitusyon tungkol sa mandato ng ating mga korte. Malinaw sa Article 8, Section 1 of the Constitution na judicial power includes the duty of the courts of justice to settle actual controversies involving rights which are legally demandable and enforceable, and to determine whether or not there has been a grave abuse of discretion amounting to lack or excess of jurisdiction on any part of any branch or instrumentality of the government. Sa isang desisyon ng Korte Suprema noong 2003 sa kasong Francisco versus the House of Representatives, sinabi ng Korte Suprema na the Constitution did not intend to leave the matter of impeachment to the sole discretion of Congress. Instead, it provided for certain well-defined limits. And in the language of Baker versus
Ay,
Carr,
manang Rosnet pala.
judicially
Sorry, may time pa kaya
discoverable
sumilip sa mo
standards
ading dyan.
for
Aba, iba
determining
na din konti.
validity of
Hindi, ngayon lang
exercise
tumanang.
of such discretion through
Ano to eh,
the
butuhan
power
sa
of
ano?
judicial review.
Sa Senado
Sinabi rin
kung
ng
tuloy
Korte
pa ba yung
Suprema
impeachment
sa Angara
ni
versus
Sara or
Electoral
hindi
Commission
na.
na the
So nag-i-explain
judiciary
sila
in
ng
turn
vote
with the
ng
Supreme
boto nila
Court
isa-isa.
as the final arbiter effectively checks the other departments in the exercise of its power to determine the law and hence to declare executive and legislative acts void if violative of the Constitution. Maraming iba-ibang halimbawa, pero iisa ang mensahe. Mandato at responsibilidad ng ating mga korte na tingnan at i-review kung nagkaroon ng pang-aabuso, grave abuse of discretion o di tamang pagsunod sa proseso na itinakda ng konstitusyon. At gaya ng paggalang ng judiciary sa tungkulin ng ibang sangay ng gobyerno, it is our duty to respect the decision of the Supreme Court. Hindi dahil sinabi lang nila, kung hindi kinikilala at nirirespeto natin ang tungkulin nila. In this instance, following and protecting the process of the law means respecting the decision of the Supreme Court. Hindi ito simpleng pagsunod. We do not follow for the sake of following. Ang pagsunod sa batas at sa mga prosesong tungkol sa batas ay isa sa mga susi ng maayos na lipunan at pagbigay ng hustisya. Kapag malinaw ang ating proseso, madaling gumalaw, walang nasasayang na panahon, at mas madaling makita ang katotohanan. Law and order ensure consistency, and they preserve our way of life. Napaka-importante ng panahong ito. Ingatan at alagaan po natin ang saligang batas. It is not just any document or an ordinary set of rules. It is an expression of our collective vision as Filipino people. Defending and preserving the Constitution is not only our duty, it is the right thing to do. Thank you, Mr. President, esteemed colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Gatchalian. Mr. Secretary.
Senator Go.
Senator Christopher Bongo is recognized to explain his vote.
I vote yes, and I will explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Mr. President, I want to register my affirmative vote to adhere with the Supreme Court decision and to archive the articles of impeachment. The Supreme Court has already spoken in a crystal clear language. The court unanimously ruled that the articles of impeachment against the Vice President are unconstitutional. That the Senate did not acquire jurisdiction to constitute ourselves as the impeachment court, and that the decision of the High Court is immediately executory. The ruling is clear. Wala na dapat tayong impeachment na pag-uusapan sa ngayon. This principle of checks and balances of the co-equal branches of our government is the very foundation of our democratic and republican way of life. The separation of powers allocates to each branch certain powers and prerogatives that other branches may not question or interfere with. Disrupt that delicate balance and we shake, if not threaten, the foundation of our democratic system. When that happens, the people's faith in the various institutions of our government will be lessened. God forbid, we do not want to come to a point when our people no longer trust our courts. Sa ngayon, meron na pong unanimous decision ang ating Korte Suprema, igalang po natin ito. That is why I voted in favor of the motion to adhere with the Supreme Court decision. But let me be very clear. Hindi ko sinasabi na hindi tayo sang-ayon sa accountability. Sa pagkakakilala ko sa mga Duterte, di sila tumatakbo sa kanilang responsibilidad. Haharapin at harapin nila ang anumang hamon ng panahon basta ginawa lamang po ito sa tamang paraan. Nabanggit din ni Vice President Sara Duterte na handa niyang harapin ang impeachment case laban sa kanya. Ang sabi ko nga noong nagsalita ako rito last June para i-suggest na ibalik ang articles of impeachment sa House of Representatives upang matingnan at masigurong nasusunod ang tamang proseso. I said that justice done the wrong way is not justice at all. Marami namang mekanismo upang mapanagot ang kahit sino mang opisyal ng gobyerno na may pananagutan. Kung meron mang pananagutan, ang mahalaga ay nagagawa ito sa tama at legal na paraan. Mr. President, mag-move on na tayo upang mas magampanan natin ang ating pangunahing mandato at ito ay ang magpanday ng mga batas. Batas na makakatulong sa mga mahirap nating kababayang Pilipino. Napakarami pa rin sa ating mga kababayan ang walang maayos at disenteng trabaho, Napakaraming pamilya ang natutulog sa gabi na walang laman ang tiyan. Napakarami pa rin sa mga mamamayan nating mga nagsasangla ng kalabaw, nagbibenta ng ari-arian sa oras ng tinamaan sila ng sakit. At napakarami pa rin Pilipino ang hirap makakuha ng mga serbisyo at tulong mula sa gobyerno. Kaya magtrabaho na lang muna tayo. Nabibigyan na po ang Pilipino dahil sa ingay ng politika. Politikang hindi naman masasaing sa umaga, politikang hindi naman pwedeng magamit pambayad sa tuition sa paralan, politikang hindi naman makapagbibigay lunas sa may mga sakit. Let us buckle down to our work. The people expect nothing less from us. Ever since, I am for peace and unity. Nakikiusap po ako na magkaisa na tayo para makapagserbisyo na tayo sa ating mga kapwa Pilipino. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Christopher Bongo. Mr. Secretary.
Senator Ontiveros.
Senator Risa Ontiveros is next to explain.
Naku, mahaba rin to.
Salamat po, Mr. President. Mr. President, I vote no. The 1987 Constitution entrusted the duty to try and decide all cases of impeachment to the Senate. Today, we are voting to abandon this mandate. I reiterate that the Supreme Court decision is not yet final. Kahit paano mo baliktarin. So, make no mistake, this was an act of the Senate. It is our institution which, in the words of colleagues, killed the articles of impeachment. Ang pinanggagalingan ko lamang po dito, pananagutan. Our people must have the power to make the highest rulers accountable. The process of impeachment is meant to question the powers that be and whether they deserve that power. In short, karapat-dapat ka ba? Hindi po dapat mahirap at teknikal ang impeachment. Taliwas ito sa intent ng framers. It should not be taxing to hold power to account. Anything that will make it easier for a public officer to evade accountability should be opposed. Ang hangad ko sana ay matulungan natin ang isa't isa. Tulungan natin ang ating mga kababayan na sagutin ito ng buo, ng may tapang at ng walang palikoy-likoy. Ma-dismiss man natin ngayon o ma-archive ang articles of impeachment, mas mahirap i-dismiss o i-archive ang daing ng mga tao sa pananagutan at katarungan. Salamat po, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Buti na lang, maikli lang.
Senator Lacson.
Senator Panfilo Ping Lacson is recognized to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. President. Without the words immediately executory and the phrase on 25 July 2025, which held, among others, that the articles of impeachment are null and void ab initio and that the Senate did not acquire jurisdiction over the same, I would have voted in favor of the amended motion because I have always maintained that we must respect and not disobey the Supreme Court. But since there's still a pending motion for reconsideration filed by the House of Representatives through the Solicitor General, I believe that the July 25 ruling is by no means final until it rules on the motion for reconsideration with finality. That being said, I would rather wait, not preempt, the final ruling of the High Court. It is for these reasons that I abstain, Mr. President.
Abstain.
Thank
Bishop
you,
Omoto.
Senator Lacson. Secretary.
Senator Lapid.
Senator Lito Lapid is recognized.
Mr. President, rinirespeto ko po at tinagala ko ang kataas-taasan ng hukuman. Ang boto ko po ay yes. Salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Senator Lapid. Secretary.
Senator Legarda.
Senator Lauren Legarda is recognized to explain her vote.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the Supreme Court has ruled with clarity It declared the impeachment complaint not only constitutionally barred, but void from the beginning, and further held that the Senate did not acquire jurisdiction over the matter. This decision, by express pronouncement, is immediately executory. We in the Senate are stewards of the Constitution and the rule of law. Our fidelity must be strongest precisely when institutions are under strain or pressure. To proceed as though the ruling were uncertain or optional would be a departure from our constitutional duty. This manifestation is a commitment to respect the present authority of the court's decision while remaining open to its final word. I cast my vote without prejudice to the Supreme Court's disposition of the pending motion for reconsideration. The court speaks, and at times it speaks again. But until it does, the Senate must not act contrary to what it has already said. For these reasons, I vote yes. I honor the decision of the Supreme Court. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Legarda. Mr. Secretary.
Senator Marcoleta.
Senator Rodante Marcoleta is recognized to explain his vote.
Ginoong Pangulo, noong ang ating Panginoong Diyos ay nilalang po niya yung unang dalawang tao, pinagsabihan niya rin po meron siyang isang sinabi sa kanila na para na rin po sa kanilang kapakanan. Ang sabi po niya, kayong dalawa, lahat ng nakikita ninyo na bunga ng halamanan sa inyong paligid at lahat ng mga hayop na nakikita nyo na gumagala riyan, pwede ninyong kainin para sa inyo lahat yan. Ngunit yung natatangi na puno na nandiyon sa gitna, ay huwag ninyong gagalawin. Matatag po ang kabawalan ng ating Panginoon Diyos. Kaya lang po, meron pong isang ahas na biglang nakialam. Sabi niya doon sa babae, sinabi ba ikaw ng Panginoon Diyos na pagka kumain kayo dyan sa bunga nung nasa gitna na yun, ay kayo mamamatay? Oo, sabi ng babae. Ay, hindi totoo yun. Ang totoo niyan, pagka kumain kayo dyan, mas lalo kayong tatalin. Ito naman si babae, Mr. President. Nakinig. At nung makinig siya, pinuntahan pa niya yung asawa niya. Yun po yung kauna-unahang under desire po, Mr. President. Napakain din po yung asawa. Ano po ang ibig ko sabihin? Bakit ko po nilalahat ang pangyayari? Meron na pong kapasyahan. Ang dami pong gustong sumausaw. Ang dami pong gustong magsabi ng kaiba yung pananaw at paniniwala doon sa kapasyahan na iginagalang nating lahat. Ang ibig ko po sanang sabihin, magpakaingat-ingat naman tayo kung sino-sino na lang ang pong nagpapayo sa atin. Kung mapapansin po ninyo ang karamihan ng nagpapayo na yan, may pagkakatulad po silang lahat. Una, lahat po sila hindi nila binasa ng kumpleto yung rules of procedures ng impeachment proceedings sa House of Representatives. Sapagkat kung binasa po nila yon, malamang hindi po ganun ang kanilang ibinubulong. Pangalawa, lahat po nung yun ay puro paborito po ng mainstream media. Sila na lang po yung tinatanong. Pangatlo, lahat po ng yun, walang pagmamahal sa mga Duterte. Ngayon, kung yung kalipunan po ng mga tao na yun, ang karamihan po sila, sa kanila ay nagsasabi, sila po yung mga legal luminaries. Tingin ko po sa kanila, yung iba ay legal mercenaries, Mr. President. With all due respect to the word. Kaya po kung minsan, imbes na po malinawan ang marami po nating kababayan, nagkakaroon po ng pag-aalinlangan. Yung iba po ay naililigaw, nalilin lang sapagkat iba't iba. Kaiba yung mga paniniwala, pinipilit at gustong ipilit na yung pa yung mananaig kesa doon sa kapasyahan na po na ibinaba ng Korte Suprema. E kung sa bagay nga po, sa una ko pong paghalimbawa, Panginoon Diyos na nga po yun eh. Kinontra pa ng ahas. Ginong Pangulo, sa mga abogado po, palaging may biruan eh. Kasi po sa lahat ng pagdidiskusyon ng ating korte, lalong-lalo na po ang kataas-taasang hukuman, hindi naman po lahat ay agreeable.
Ma'am Jem, shout
Merong
out.
partidong agree siya, merong partidong masaya siya. Ngunit, sa katapos-tapusan eh, wala po tayong magagawa kundi tanggapin ang kapasyahan. Kasi po sinasabi nga natin kahit pabiro. Alam mo ninyo, basta desisyon ng Korte Suprema ay nagiging bahagi ng ating mga batas. Maliman o tama. Yun po ay nasa Article 8 Civil Code na binanggit na po kanina ni Senator Bato. Na sinasabi po, judicial decisions applying or interpreting the laws on the Constitution shall form part of the legal system of the Philippines. Wala na po tayong magagawa doon. Batas na po yun eh. Sa akin pong nauna...
Ano to Ma'am Jem? Butuhan sa Senate kung matutuloy pa yung impeachment or hindi na.
I will just request that
So
my
every
entire
senator
speech,
nag-i-explain
Mr.
sila ng
President,
votes nila kung yes,
be incorporated
yes in
by way of
favor na
reference
hindi na ma-dismiss.
included in this explanation and my voting yes for my own
Pag
motion.
yes ang boto mo,
Senator,
you are in favor to dismiss the impeachment case of Sara Duterte.
Senator Marcos.
Senator Amy Marcos recognized to explain her vote.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I vote a resounding yes. Sa hinabahaba kong pagsisilbi sa Kongreso, sa 12 taon na nanilbihan kami, ang trabaho ng kongrestista sa pagkaalam
GD,
ko
shout out.
ay maging kinatawan ng kanilang distrito o kanilang sektor. Bakit naman ngayon ay naging tagabantay na lamang sila ng humihiyaw na dambuhalang sanggol? Ginawa ng bonjing na armas ang impeachment. Ang dating para sana sa kaayusan ng sistema, ginagawang pampagulo, panakot at sandata laban sa mga kinaiinggitan, kinaiinsecuran ng mga lulong sa kapangyarihan. Dalangin naman natin ang Korte Suprema. Huwag tayong umastang Supreme Court. Supremes pa. Wala namang ganun ah. Sa mga kapatid kong senador, paano tayo magiging dakilang mambabatas kung tayo mismo ay hindi susunod sa batas? Ang boses ng Korte Suprema ay boses ng konstitusyon. At kung sino man ang sasapaw sa boses na ito ay isa lang ang tono, ambisyon. Kaya naman, mag-move on na tayo. Magtrabaho at huwag konsintihin ang isang spoiled na bonjing. Huwag nang busugin ng pabor. Huwag nang pumayag dahil may pabuya. Huwag tayo magpalaki ng buhaya, baby pa nga ang tawag, lulong na. Sa mga mahal kong kongresista, may suggestion po ako. Ito suggestion lang naman, ano? Huwag niyong masamain. Kesa inaatupag ninyong palitan ang pinili ng taong bayan, binoto at minahal. Bakit di nyo nalang palitan ang tao, kayo naman lang ang pumili? Ayaw paawat ng iba sa kakaflex. Ano kaya kung yung speaker nyo na lang ang paltan nyo? Kaya nyo yan. At dahil dito, bumuboto ako ng malakas na oo. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Senator Amy.
Lakas
For
mga
the,
asar niya, ano, kay.
Secretary recognized the Senator. Who are these people almost creating trouble there? Can you please trace their identities and send them out of this building?
Patay.
Secretary.
Senator Padilla.
Senator Robin Hood Padilla is recognized to explain his vote.
Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo. A'udhu billahi minasyaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Bismillahi wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi. Alam niyo po, ito na po siguro ang pinakamaligayang araw sa buhay ko sapagkat makasaysayan. Ako po ay nagpupugay at malalim na paghanga sa isinagawang paliwanagan ni Senator Marcoleta, Senator Soto, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lacson, Senator Pangilinan, Senator Aquino, Senator Pia Alan Cayetano, Senator Rafi Erwin Tulfo, Senator Mick Subiri. Ang palitan ng mga paniniwala sa plenaryo ay simbolo ng humihinga at buhay na Senado. Nagagawa natin ang kalayaan at kasarinlan. Isang demokrasya na naririnig ang bawat naratibo. Tagahanga po ninyo ako lahat. At alam naman po ninyo, sa maiksing panahon ko rito, ako ay pro-Westminster. At ngayon, system po. System. Yan po yung parang sa UK. At yan po yung nakita ko ngayong araw na ito. Ang lahat ng mga senador ay gising. Ang lahat ng mga senador ay nandito. Ang lahat ng mga senador ay nagtatrabaho sa ayon sa kagustuhan kong makita ko ang bawat debate at ang bawat opinion ng bawat isa. Kaya nagpapasalamat po ako. Napakagandang araw po nito sa inyong lahat at sa ating lahat. Ngayon, mga kababayan, gusto ko pong malaman ninyo na ako po ay nagbibigay pugay sa lahat ng nanonood sa atin ngayon. Malamang, ang sasabihin ninyo, siyempre si Robin Padilla, ang boto niyan, alam na natin. Eh, mabuti po, alam niyo na. Ang gusto ko lamang pong liwanagin ay ito. Ang nais ko, sana, ay katapusan na nito. Dismissal. Una pa lang po, bago pa lang po kami na-convene, labag na po sa kalooban ko na matuloy ito. Nakita niyo naman po, noong nagkasumpaan, talagang ipinaglalaban namin na politika ito. Politika ito At kailangan ng due process. Pero natuloy pa rin po, nag-convene pa rin. Pero hindi pa rin po ako nagsuot ng robe dahil para sa akin ay protesta. Ayoko po talagang matuloy. Bakit? Sa loob po ng matagal na panahon ni Bonifacio, ni Aguinaldo, panahon ni Aguinaldo, ni Quezon, panahon ni Marcos Sr., ni Aquino Sr., ni Aquino Jr., ni Arroyo, Marcos Jr., PRRD Duterte, HOR ngayon, at Vice President Duterte. Hindi na po tayo natapos sa usapin ng politika at yan po ay pinagtibay ng Supreme Court sa kanyang desisyon na sinabi niya mismo, oo, politika lang impeachment, pero hindi kailanman dapat masagasaan nito ang karapatan ng tao. Malinaw at yun po ang pinaglalaban natin at kailangan dumaan sa tamang proseso. At yan po ang pinaglalaban natin. Ngayon, mga mahal kong kaibigan, pagkatapos po natin marinig ang bawat punto ng bawat isa, sana po matapos na po ito at harapin na po natin ang mga tunay na problema ng bayan. Katulad po ng sweldo, katulad po ng agrikultura, pagkain, kaguluhan sa West Philippine Sea, sa buong mundo. Ang dami po nating dapat pag-usapan. Total, meron pa naman pong Pebrero. Ang sinabi naman po ng Supreme Court at ang Supreme Court naman po, ang siya naman po dapat na sinasabi ng saligang batas. Malinaw po. Matagal po akong ginawang chairman ng constitutional ni dating Pangulo Vic Subiri. Pinagkatiwalaan niya po tayo, pinag-aralan po natin yan at malinaw sa konstitusyon na ang magpapaliwanag ng saligang batas ay Supreme Court. Kaya sana po, ako'y malungkot talaga dahil napunta tayo sa archive. Yung archive, binasa ko pwede pala yung hukayin anytime kung ano man. So, hindi pa rin tayo natapos. Kaya sana po, Bagamat ang boto ko ay yes. Aray. Gusto kong malaman at mailagay po sa lathalan ng Senado na ako'y may reserbasyon na. Malaking reserbasyon ko dahil gusto kong dismissal. Tapusin na natin to. Hindi pa tayo natapos. Total, nasabi na lahat. O, ilang oras ang banatan. Pero hindi pa rin natapos. Kaya po, mga mahal kong kababayan, bago po ako umupo, nais ko pong malaman ninyo na ang inyong Senado ay tumatakbo. Huwag po kayong malungkot sa mga hindi pabor sa amin o sa mga pabor naman. Isa lang po ang masasabi ko. Tigilan na natin ang politika at mahalin natin ang bawat isa, magkaisa na tayo, pag-usapan natin ang mga totoong problema. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Senator Robin Hood Padilla, Madam Secretary.
Senator Pangilinan.
Senator Francis Kiko Pangilinan is recognized to explain his vote.
This representation votes no. Unang-una, ang boto na no ay hindi nangangahulugan na hindi natin nirerespeto ang pasya o kapangyarihan ng Korte Suprema. Lalo-lalo na hindi pa ito pinal. Wala sa hanay ng mga senador na bumoto ng no ang nagsasabi na hindi dapat respetuhin ang pasya ng Korte Suprema. Hintayin lang ang final decision. Kung tutuusin, kung hinintay lang natin ang final decision, hindi tayo nagpasya at wala tayong ginawa ng mga hakbang out of respect dahil nga pending pa. Wala tayong nilabag sa pagiging immediately executory ng desisyon. Kaya kataka-taka kung bakit kailangan magkaroon ng archiving. Pero pasya ito ng mayorya. Mr. President, bumoto tayo ng no dahil naniniwala tayo. Mas mainam sana na hintayin nga ang resolusyon ng motion for reconsideration. Dagdag siyempre dyan ang pagkilala ng prinsipyo ng co-equality sa House of Representatives. Yung interchamber courtesy, yung pagbibigay galang sa isang
Mami kabistak si Kiko lang may puti.
respeto sa isang co-equal. Kaya nais po sana nating
Highlight
ilagay
yan.
muna yung matter on the table. To vote to archive the complaint despite the MR still pending, I believe, Mr. President, and I believe the others who voted no share this position, is premature, as the ruling may still be reversed or modified. In addition, at ito nga ang isang contention, to vote to archive the impeachment complaint, if at all, is to give the Senate the powers which
Marang
are already
Diday,
reserved
shout out.
for the impeachment court, deciding
Ongoing Manang Diday ang botohan kung matutuloy pa ang impeachment or hindi na, no?
in that the Senate and
So
not the
every
impeachment
senator
court
nag-explain sila ng boto
acted
nila.
on the impeachment
Yes,
cases
in favor na
of former
ma-dismiss.
President Estrada
No,
and Mercedes Gutierrez.
wag muna.
But we submit, iba yung facts nung mga kaso na yun. In the Estrada case, supervening events led to the termination of the trial. In the case of Gutierrez, the Senate did not convene as an impeachment court. Kaya iba, apples to oranges, ika nga. We believe archiving the case is a matter exclusively within the powers and jurisdiction of the Senate Impeachment Court. Kaya lay on the table sana ang maayos na proseso under our rules. allow me to reiterate that the final decision of the Supreme Court, yes, must be respected. The Supreme Court ruled that the impeachment court did not acquire jurisdiction, and its ruling rendered the official acts of convening as a court, of taking the oath, issuing of summons, and remanding the complaint as, for all intents and purposes, nullified. Kaya tinanong natin kanina, ano na ang nangyari sa constitutional duty and constitutional power as sole power to try and decide impeachment cases. We took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, and that includes our own determination whether or not the nullification of the acts of the impeachment court, an exclusive sole power to try and decide impeachment cases, if the ruling was based on the facts and not on a misappreciation of the facts. Kaya nga, sana hinintay ang motion for reconsideration. The impeachment court, being ousted of its jurisdiction by the Supreme Court, is unprecedented, based, and sadly,
Maria Amor, shout out dito sa US. Respect
decision
nila kahit
based
presidente
on
ka
the
pa.
wrong facts.
Hi,
It is
only in the
disturbing.
Philippines.
The distinguished minority leader pointed out, point for point, in his interpellation and manifestation, the errors in the facts that the Supreme Court based its findings of grave abuse. I reiterate, one cannot be right with the law if one is wrong with the facts. And that's why napakahalaga ng motion for reconsideration. There is still an opportunity for the errors to be corrected, kaya nandyan ang MR. And this is the reason why we voted no. Napaka-precedent setting nitong nawalan ng jurisdiksyon ang impeachment court, nawalan ng kapangyarihan o isinantabi ang kapangyarihan, sole power of the House of Representatives to initiate proceedings, at naway sa pamamagitan ng motion for reconsideration, mabalik yung ating kaninang nabanggit na ma-harmonize yung lahat ng mga constitutional provisions na hindi nag-aaway kung hindi lahat ay mabibigyan ng legal at binding effect. The power of judicial review, the sole power to initiate impeachment proceedings, and the sole power to try and decide cases of the Supreme Court, of the House of Representatives, and of the Senate. Maraming salamat.
Senator Soto.
The minority leader is recognized to explain his vote.
Mr. President, I have more than expressed myself on this issue. Just in addition, a lingering question. How can the Senate archive something that is not before it? The articles are before the impeachment court. Therefore, I cast a negative vote.
Thank you, Minority Leader, Senator Soto.
Senator Tulfo Erwin.
Senator Erwin Tulfo is recognized to explain his vote.
Ginoong Pangulo, mga kapwa kong senador, sa sambayan ng Pilipino. Bumoto po ako ng yes sa mosyon na sumasang-ayon sa desisyon ng Korte Suprema sa impeachment case
laban kay Vice President Duterte. Ito po ay hindi sa gusto kong iligtas ang Vice Presidente, kundi dahil malinaw ang sinasabi ng ating batas at mas malinaw pa ang desisyon ng Korte Suprema na ito po ay labag sa konstitusyon. Alinsunod po sa one-year bar rule, hindi maaaring magsampa muli ng impeachment complaint ng 1 taon matapos ang naunang reklamo. Ayon po sa kataas-taasang hukuman, ito ay nalabag. At bilang mambabatas, hindi ako pwedeng pumikit na lang sa harap ng isang tahasang paglabag sa ating saligang batas. At para saan o ano pa ang saysay ng panunumpa natin noong nakarang linggo sa tungkulin na nakasaad doon na that I will protect and defend the Constitution kung ito ay susuwin lang naman natin. Ngunit, linawin ko, ang boto ko ay hindi para i-absuelto si VP Sara Duterte. Sa totoo lang po, gusto ko siyang humarap sa paglilitis upang maipaliwanag ang mga issue, upang sumagot sa mga tanong ng taong bayan at upang harapin anumang pananagutan kung ito'y nararapat. Dahil ang paninilbihan sa taong bayan ay hindi po pribilehyo, kundi isa ring pananagutan. Public service is not just a privilege, rather it carries also huge responsibilities. Sa loob po ng mahabang panahon, nasanay na ang ilang matataas na opisyal kapag may kapangyarihan, may lusot. Kapag mataas ang posisyon, immune sa tanong o investigasyon. Tama na, panahon nang baguhin ito. Kung tunay po na walang kasalanan si VP Duterte, dapat siya mismo ang manguna sa pagbubukas ng lahat ng dokumento, paggamit ng budget at mga hakbangin niya bilang pangalawang Pangulo at kalihim ng DepEd. Walang dahilan para umiwas kung malinis po ang konsensya. Ang boto kong yes ay hindi pagtatanggol sa kanya, kundi pagtatanggol sa legalidad ng proseso. Hindi po ito ang wakas. Kung may basihan at sa tamang panahon, hindi po ako magdadalawang isip na suportahang muli ang isang lehitimo at makatarungang impeachment. Dahil ang pamahalaan po ay para sa taong bayan, hindi po para sa ilang nasa puder. Maraming salamat at mabuhay po ang sambayanang Pilipino.
Maraming salamat, Senator Erwin Tulfo, Ilong Secretary.
Bitina, shout out.
Senator Rafi Tulfo is hereby recognized to explain his vote.
Mamaya na.
Mr. President, my vote is yes. Let me explain my vote. My dear colleagues, in our Constitution, the sovereign Filipino people agreed to establish a government that will run our
Nako,
country.
nagbabasa naman to ng kanyang ano.
Malinaw dito kung ano ang kapangyarihan ng bawat sangay. Ang legislatura ang tagagawa ng mga batas.
Sandali lang guys.
Ang ehekutibo ang tagapatupad ng batas. On the other hand, ang Korte Suprema naman ang taga-interpret o tagapaliwanag ng batas kapag may hindi malinaw dito o may pagtatalo kung paano ito ipapatupad. Kaya naman, ang respeto ng bawat sangay ng gobyerno sa isa't isa ay mahalaga upang tuloy-tuloy ang maayos na pagpapalakad ng ating gobyerno. Under the Constitution, it is the House of Representatives that shall have the exclusive power to initiate all cases of impeachment. Wala po tayong papel sa proseso na yan. Our role only comes when a valid articles of impeachment complaint is
Tool po
filed
letter
before us.
TUV. Villar na lang ang boboto.
Mr. President, the case before the Supreme Court is about the impeachment initiation procedure before the House of Representatives. Whether a case of impeachment has been initiated according to the text and spirit of the Constitution. Of course, I will not delve into the correctness of the decision of the Supreme Court, but I believe it is within their authority to interpret the Constitution and declare whether the actions and processes before the House is constitutional. And so, we must accord the decision of the Supreme Court the same respect that they give the laws that we enact as the legislative. That is the scope and limitation of our powers. Having said that, allow me to go to the clear, dispositive portion of the decision. Sa dulo po ng 97-page decision, ito po ang sinabi ng ating Korte Suprema. Una, the articles of impeachment are unconstitutional and are deemed null and void ab initio.
Tatlo pala ang boto ng
In other words, walang bisa
isang abstain.
noong simula pa lang. Second, the court said
Nag-abstain si ano.
the Senate did not acquire
Si-
jurisdiction to
si-
constitute
nag-abstain.
itself into
Lauren
an impeachment
Legarda yan.
court. Ibig sabihin, hindi nagkaroon ng Senado ng kapangyarihan maglitis bilang impeachment court. Mr. President, I agree that we should abide by the decision of the court to avoid any constitutional crisis. And if I were to take the duty to my heart, I believe the decision is very clear. No impeachment court was validly convened. That's my vote. With that said,
Ano
however,
sinelas kung suotin mo?
there are concerns raised regarding the decision. So it is important for the Supreme Court to address these concerns. I have faith in the Supreme Court that it will perform its mandate. That's all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Rafi Tulfo.
Villar.
Terry?
Senator Villanueva.
Ay, Villanueva pa.
Majority Leader, Side 9, Senator
Tragis
Villanueva.
na yan.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, this representation stands today not just a senator judge, but as a member of this institution who took an oath to uphold the Constitution. And I'm here, Mr. President, to explain my vote. But more importantly,
Simo, shout
stay true to that oath, to serve with integrity and give life to the spirit of the law. Article 11, Section 1 of our Constitution provides that public office is a public trust. Ang isang katungkulan sa pamahalaan ay isang tiwalang ipinagkaloob.
Baka may gusto mag-live dyan ha, mag-live na kayo.
This underscores one of the core
Nire-record ko lang to.
that ultimate political power resides with the people. And thus, the preamble starts, Mr. President, we, the sovereign Filipino
Simo,
people,
shout out.
because the government's
Thank you,
authority
thank you.
and legitimacy emanates from the people. Thomas Jefferson encapsulated the expectation from a person holding public office in one sentence. When a man assumes a public trust, he should consider himself as public property. Close quote. Kapalit ng tiwalang ipinagkakaloob ng bayan sa isang tao ay ang paglilingkod ng may katapatan sa saligang batas at
Bakit
sumasalamin
binabasa?
sa mithiin ng bayan na nakapaloob.
Eh, alam mo naman mga senador
Yung
natin.
Pangulo, pag-aari ka ng publiko dahil ang bawat galaw at desisyon mo ay hindi para sa sarili, kundi laging para sa bayan. While due process protects life, liberty, and property, public office is not private property. As Justice Malcolm wrote in Segovia versus Noel, a public position is not owned by its holder. Ang posisyon sa gobyerno ay hindi premyo o personal na karapatan. Ito po ay pananagutan at pagtitiwala ng taong bayan. During the July 26, 1986 discussion of the Constitutional Commission, it was noted that, and I quote, a violation of an oath of office is itself a violation of the Constitution because a public official's oath.
Puro puti na nga mami kabisdak eh.
Thus, accountability is not only a moral imperative, It is a constitutional duty. Public officials are answerable to the people at all times. And the mechanisms of impeachment and oversight exist precisely because no one can claim a vested personal entitlement to office. Where accountability is demanded, due process must still be observed.
Yeah,
Ngunit Ginoong Pangulo, hindi po ito dapat maging
ganyan naman
panangga
talaga
laban
sila.
sa
Every
mga
time ng
tarungan at lihiting
kahit privilege
pagsusuri
speech nila.
o gamitin upang gawing pagmamayari ng isang tungkulin pampubliko. Higit po sa lahat, hindi ito dapat
Correct.
kasangkapan
Kabsat
upang
Patris.
takasan ang pananagutan. Wala po ni isa ang nakatataas sa pananagutan, nakakatakas sa pananagutan. Lalo na po ang mga nasa pinakamataas na posisyon ng ating bayan. Mabigat po ang papel natin dito sa Senado, Ginoong Pangulo, lalo na sa impeachment. Hindi po ito simpleng usaping legal. Desisyon po ito na nakabatay sa batas at nagmula rin sa ating prinsipyo at konsensya. The framers of our Constitution knew this. That's why impeachment decisions are ultimately acts of political and moral judgment, not just strict legal analysis. Kaya po malinaw ang disenyo ng ating saligang batas. Ang House ang may eksklusibong kapangyarihan para magpasimula ng impeachment. At ang Senado ang tanging may kapangyarihan na lumitis at magdesisyon. This is a sui generis role, unique, exceptional, and deeply rooted in our democratic system. That is also why both chambers of Congress were given the authority to craft their own rules of procedure in impeachment cases. May mga bumatikos po sa atin noon, Ginoong Pangulo, sa pag-remand natin ng articles of impeachment sa House. At sabi nila, ng mga bumabatikos, pag-iwas daw po ito sa tungkulin. Pero kung susuriin pong mabuti, Ginoong Pangulo, hindi po ito pag-atras sa ating tungkulin. It was a necessary and prudent step towards ensuring that the proper procedure was followed so that our decision as a court will not be marred by legal and constitutional infirmities. Now we are faced with the High Court's decision that tackles precisely that which we hope to avert when we remanded the articles of impeachment, Mr. President. So clearly today, the Supreme Court's decision in GR 278353 is a vindication of the Senate action. We have been called so many names, Mr. President, and ridiculed in the digital court of public opinion. I'm sure the Senate President would likely agree with this representation that the allegations thrown at us regarding the impeachment and even the decision of the Supreme Court, a matter that we have no participation in, are extremely preposterous and absurd. This exercise, while political in nature, is not about personalities, it's not about revenge, it's not about prevailing sentiments or personal biases. It is about upholding what is legal and constitutional and what will hold true in the years that follow. Let me make one thing clear to our kababayans, mahal nating mga kababayan. We in the Senate have never abandoned our mandate in this impeachment proceeding. Ang bawat hakbang po na ating tinahak ay nakaangkla sa kaluluwa ng ating bayan, ang ating inaalagaan at pinoprotektahan sa ligang batas ng Republika ng Pilipinas. But as they say, Mr. President, dissent is not a threat to democracy. It is essential to its survival. Kaya doon po sa mga pumuna, sa mga nagsabing mali ang naging pasyon ng Senado, hindi tama ang ginawa po natin dito, naintindihan naman po natin sila kung saan sila nanggagaling. And in that same democratic spirit, I now take this opportunity to respectfully air my own dissent to certain portions of the Supreme Court's decision. While we respect the court's authority, I believe there are portions of the ruling that may have inadvertently made the already difficult process of impeachment even harder. Agree po ako doon, Ginoong Pangulo. Impeachment was never meant to be easy, but neither was it designed to be impossible. The framers of our Constitution deliberately relaxed the rules to empower the people and lower the barriers to initiating accountability against high-ranking officials. The Constitution even allows any ordinary citizen to file a verified complaint. Ang mababa at mataas na kapulungan ng Kongreso ang nagsisilbing takbuhan ng mamamayan. Sa mga pagkakataong wasak na ang tiwalang ipinagkaloob ng publiko sa mga inuluklok nito. And yet, Mr. President, with this decision, we now see new procedural hurdles that were not explicitly required by the Constitution, including the rigid interpretations of due process at the preliminary stage. These add layers of complication to a process that is already politically and institutionally fragile. Kung hindi po natin iingatan, tama po yun. Baka po mawalan ng saysay ang impeachment. Buhay sa papel, ngunit patay sa proseso. This was no accident of drafting, Mr. President. The framers of the 87 Constitution intentionally relaxed the requirements for initiating impeachment, lowering the vote needed from 2/3 as required in the past constitutions to just 1/3 of all House members. As explained by the framers of our Constitution, this was meant to, I quote, make it easier, not harder, to hold high public officials accountable, close quote. They had lived through a time when power went unchecked and accountability was elusive. Kaya siniguro po nila na ang kapangyarihan ay laging may akaakibat na pananagutan. Mr. President, this representation did not come to this decision lightly. We understand and value the necessity of public accountability. Naiintindihan po natin yan. Napakahalaga po yan. Walang sino man po ang dapat mailagay sa pedestal na hindi kayang abutin ng batas. Pero ang pananagutan po ay kailangan tumaan sa tamang proseso. Isang proseso na hindi lamang makatarungan, kundi naaayon at tumatalima sa saligang batas ng Republika ng Pilipinas. Sa mga ganito pong sitwasyon, hindi po naaalis sa aking isipan. Kung may mga pagkakataon meron po bang pagkakataon na maaaring labagin ng Senado ang mga ipinag-utos ng Korte Suprema? Maaaring halimbawa po nito ay kung may klarong panghimasok sa internal rules o procedure ng Senado ang Korte Suprema. Ngunit, Ginoong Pangulo, sa pagbibigay kahulugan sa nakasaad sa ating saligang batas, tanging Korte Suprema lamang ang may kapangyarihang bilang pinal na tagapagpasya. Article 8, Section 1 of the 87 Constitution expands the Supreme Court's scope of judicial power by mandating it to determine whether or not there has been a grave abuse of discretion amounting to lack or excess of jurisdiction on the part of any branch or instrumentality of the government. In the case of Angara versus Electoral Commission, Justice Jose P. Laurel, who later became the third president of the Republic, wrote, and I quote, "When the judiciary mediates to allocate constitutional boundaries, it does not assert any superiority over the other departments. It does not in reality nullify or invalidate an act of the legislature, but only asserts the solemn and sacred obligation assigned to it by the Constitution." Close quote. Noong pong tinatalakay ng ating mga constitutional framers ang provision sa Konstitusyon patungkol po sa proseso ng impeachment, binanggit po ng kagalang-galang na Commissioner Dodong Maambong ang isang CP mula sa isang kaso sa Amerika. Sabi po niya, and I quote, "Ang impeachment ay ang unang hakbang sa isang proseso ng pagwawasto. Ang layunin po nito ay hindi personal na pagpaparusa sa nasasaktan, bagkos ang pangunahing layunin nito ay panatilihin ang pamahalaang naaayon sa Konstitusyon." This quote captures the heart of what impeachment is meant to be, Mr. President. It is not about personalities or punishment. It is about protecting the very structure of our constitutional democracy. And sometimes protecting that structure means accepting limits, even when we disagree with how those limits are drawn. In this case, the Supreme Court, as the final interpreter of our laws, has spoken unanimously, and I will say it again, spoken unanimously, decisively, and with finality. It ruled that the impeachment complaint violated the one-year bar rule. The Vice President was denied due process, and that this Senate, as of the moment, had not acquired jurisdiction. Mr. President, in closing, again, I would say we may not agree with every word of that ruling, but the rule of law is not a matter of convenience. It is the foundation of our democracy. Upholding it gives this institution its credibility and our democracy its strength. To ignore it, no matter how justified we may feel, is to risk eroding the very foundation we are sworn to defend, our beloved Constitution. Kaya po, Ginoong Pangulo, sa liwanag ng ating saligang batas at bilang paggalang sa pasya ng Korte Suprema, habang kinikilala po natin na may nakabimbing motion for reconsideration na sinampa ng House of Representatives, and in adhering to the immediately executory decision rendered by the Supreme Court, I vote to transfer the articles of impeachment to the archives. Thank you, Mr. President.
To the archives.
Senator Villar Camilo.
Senator Camille Villar is recognized. You
Ba?
may proceed, ma'am.
Ngayon ko lang makikita magsasalita to.
Mr. President, my dear colleagues, I vote yes to the motion to archive the articles of impeachment against Vice President Sara Duterte, respecting the decision of the Supreme Court. It is undeniable that the Supreme Court has the power under the Constitution to declare an act of a co-equal body as unconstitutional, a power known as judicial review. The power allows the Supreme Court to ensure that all branches of the government act within the bounds of the Constitution, and it should be respected. The three main branches of our government, the legislative, executive, and judicial, each is vested with distinct powers and functions by the Constitution, none superior to others. Each operates independently with its own sphere of authority and serves as a check and balance on the others to prevent abuse of power. This is the foundation of our democracy, and it ensures the rule of law, accountability, and protection of rights of all Filipinos. In this case, the Supreme Court has spoken. By a unanimous vote, the Supreme Court declared in clear and unequivocal terms the articles of impeachment against Vice President Sara Duterte unconstitutional and null and void ab initio for violating the one-year bar rule and due process clause. As a result, the Senate did not acquire jurisdiction to constitute itself into an impeachment court. This decision, finally, is immediately executory. Mr. President, we have heard many good arguments in the recent weeks from both sides. Just today, being the youngest member of this robust body, I have learned so much from our esteemed and distinguished colleagues. But to me, it is simple. The opinion, or the most important opinion, is that of the final arbiter of our Constitution, and that is the Supreme Court. I have faith that the Supreme Court has done their duty and fulfilled their mandate. Being a legislator and a public servant, it is my duty to abide by that decision. Not too long ago, I took my oath of office as a senator, and I swore to support and defend the Constitution, and I adhere to that today. To do otherwise can lead to uncertainty and chaos, and even a constitutional crisis. This is what the rule of law expects from each and every one of us. And to respect the rule of law is to respect our democracy. And that is why I vote yes to the motion before us.
Sa pangbilyar.
Mr. President, dalangin ko sana na marisolba na natin ngayon ito upang mapagtuunan na natin ng pansin ang mga tunay at malalaking problema na hinaharap ng ating bansa at ng ating mga kababayan, katulad ng mataas na presyo ng bilihin, magkaroon ng wastong hanap buhay, kalusugan at kaligtasan ng bawat Pilipino. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Senator Villar.
Senator Villar Mark.
Senator Mark Villar is recognized. You may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to vote yes. Explain my vote on the matter before us. To explain why we compromise today on archiving is a very important topic. But of course, we must always remember that the status quo is that the Senate has no jurisdiction. So in legal speak, this complaint is null and void. Last July 25, the Supreme Court rendered a unanimous decision declaring the articles of impeachment against Vice President Sara Duterte unconstitutional, noting that it is barred by the one-year rule under the Constitution and that it violates due process. The merits of this decision are not an issue before us. The sole question we need to answer is whether the Senate should respect the decision of the Supreme Court. And I say clearly and emphatically, yes. The Supreme Court has the ultimate authority to interpret what the Constitution is.
Guys, kung manaka-live, lipat kayo ha.
Can substitute its opinion over the courts
Si Pinoy Bro yata magla-live.
concerning the Constitution.
Tapusin ko
And
lang
the
to.
Constitution itself, in Article 8,
Tumbutuhan.
Section 1, entrenches the court's role in interpreting the Constitution and determining whether there has been a grave abuse of discretion amounting to lack or excess of jurisdiction by any branch or instrumentality of the government. This includes the Senate, even when acting as an impeachment tribunal. Justice Laurel laid down the doctrine in the Supreme Court as the final arbiter of constitutional issues in Angara versus Electoral Tribunal, where it was stated that when the judiciary mediates to allocate constitutional boundaries, it does not assert any superiority over the other departments. It does not in reality nullify or invalidate an act of the legislature, but only asserts the solemn and sacred obligation assigned to it by the Constitution to determine conflicting claims of authority under the Constitution. At dahil nagdesisyon na po ang Korte Suprema, tungkulin po ng Senado na sundin ang desisyon na ito. Sumasangayon man tayo o hindi, dahil nangako tayo, bawat isa sa ating mga senador, that we will support and defend the Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines. We commit to obeying all laws and legal orders issued by the duly constituted authorities. Nasa oath of office po natin ito. In staying true to our oath of office, we must abide by the order of the duly constituted authority in matters of the Constitution, the Supreme Court. We must uphold the Constitution. Thus, the Senate cannot acquire jurisdiction to proceed with a trial, much less issue a verdict. Tulad ng sabi ni Senior Associate Justice Yonet, the impeachment process is a constitutional process. And although it is also a political process, it is not isolated from the requirements of the Constitution as a whole. Kailangan obserbahan ang due process, ang tama at makatarungang proseso bago matanggal sa posisyon ang isang individual. Habang iginagalang natin ang opinyon at pananaw ng bawat isa sa mga importanteng usapin, kailangan natin igalang, kilalanin at bigyang halaga ang kakayahan at kaalaman ng mga maestrado ng kataas-taasang hukuman na binigyan ng kapangyarihan ng ating konstitusyon bilang huling hukom na ipaliwanag kung ano ang batas at kahulugan nito at magdesisyon ng pinal sa isyong ukol sa konstitusyon. By recognizing the authority of the Supreme Court on the matter, the Senate does not abandon its mandate and its wisdom as an independent political body, nor does it concede or submit to
Last na to si Villar, guys. Last na to.
We are simply upholding the rule of law. At kung susuway tayo sa desisyon ng Supreme Court sa isang isyong konstitusyonal, binabaliwala natin ang konstitusyon. Ito ay magdudulot ng isang krisis sa ating saligang batas at lipunan na hindi makakabuti para sa taong bayan. As a functional society governed by the rule of law, we must accord our democratic institutions with respect, value their guidance, recognize their competence, and cherish their independence. Mr. President, pinapatunayan ng desisyon na ito na makakaasa ang tao na ang due process ay hindi lang guni-guni o kasabihan walang katuturan. Na ang due process ay para sa lahat at hindi lang para sa mga kakampi. Isang patunay na mapabisi presidente man o ordinaryong Pilipino, makakasigurado tayo na ang mga institusyon, ang Korte Suprema at ang Senado ay handang ipagtanggol, pahalagahan at bantayan ang ating mga karapatan. Without the rule of law, people may act without accountability, government leaders may act on personal interest, individual rights can no longer be guaranteed. Without the rule of law, there can be no justice, no order, and no real democracy. To end, I would like to quote Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Leonen, who penned the decision. There is a right way to do the right thing at the right time. This is what the rule of just law means. This is what fairness or due process of law means, even for impeachment. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Senator Villar. Before recognizing Senator Zubiri, I'd like to thank him for his patience because he's always last whenever we do nominal voting. At some point in time, you might want to make a motion, Senator Zubiri, for us to draw lots on which letter of the alphabet we will start voting.
Thank you.
The gentleman may proceed.
Maraming salamat, Mr. President. Alam mo po yun, Ginoong Pangulo, dahil magkasama po tayo sa Kongreso ng 3 termino. At dun sa 3 termino, na alam ko yung bilang po natin ay 265, 268 congressmen. Napakahirap po pag ang iyong pangalan ay nagsisimula sa letrang Z. Kasi ako po ay palaging huli. Minsan po, wala na pong tao nakikinig sa akin. Yung janitor na po, mga page ang nag-aayos ng mga upuan. Pero, subalit na yung araw na ito, nagpapasalamat ako at napakarami pang senador na nandito po na yun. Nandito si Senator Bato, Senator Pong, Senator Robin Padilla, Senator Amy, Senator Erwin, Senator Mark Villar, our Senate President Pro Tem, who's not listening but he's here with us today, together with the MOVAT, Senator Marcoleta, and all the rest, no? Nandito ang dalawang Cayetano na kaibigan natin, yung mga seatmates nandito, and minority. Pero Mr. President, honestly, it pains me to vote against my minority floor leader. It pained me and Senator Lauren. What we are called to do here today goes beyond the simple vote. We all know that, Mr. President. It goes beyond the simple vote. Rather, for me, it's a test of our commitment to our Constitution and the rule of law. When the House of Representatives transmitted the articles of impeachment to us in February 5, 2025, my position was clear.
Janet, nandiyan ka pala.
As this is our constitutional duty. In many interviews, that's what I said. It doesn't matter how I feel about it because many people already said that I was on the other side.
Doon na kayo kay PBM, live na si Pinoy Bro.
My personal feelings are.
Interesado lang ako dito, guys, no?
Is that we proceed with our constitutional duty.
Gusto ko lang i-share sa
When
inyo,
the
no?
motion to remand the articles of impeachment came up on June 10, 2025, it was also my position, again, clear, that we must remand the articles for this, not for the
I
sake
vote
of
yes to
dismissing
you,
the
Prof.
trial, Mr.
Shinmod.
President, but for the purpose of ensuring
Magaling
that
na
the House of
moderator yan eh.
Representatives had not violated the impeachment
Congrats,
process
Shinmod, ah.
as laid out in the Constitution. I have always upheld the principles of rule of law and the primacy of the Constitution. And I've consistently shown the highest respects for the Supreme Court as the final arbiter of all constitutional questions.
Yeah.
So today, again, my position is clear.
Yeah.
We must respectfully adhere to the court's ruling that the current impeachment complaint is unconstitutional. Our Constitution expressly empowers the Supreme Court to review even the article or the actions of political branches. In Francisco versus House of Representatives, that case which has been mentioned by almost all my colleagues here, the court affirmed that it is the final arbiter for constitutional questions with authority to strike down acts that violate the Constitution. Thus, I vote to support the Supreme Court on not to proceed with the trial of the articles of impeachment as it violates both the Constitution and the guarantees of due process, rendering the current complaint unconstitutional and void ab initio. The grave denial of due process only magnifies its fatal defect. Without jurisdiction, any trial
Gutom ka na.
would be meaningless and any verdict null and
Gutom ka
void,
na.
Mr. President. To disregard the court's unanimous ruling would be to invite a constitutional crisis and to break our oath to support and defend our Constitution. The power of impeachment is
Gutom ka
not
na.
without limits, Mr. President, my dear colleagues. It must be exercised within the boundaries set by the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. And let me be clear for those listening tonight. The court did not place the Vice President beyond scrutiny. It simply required that any future impeachment follow constitutional safeguards. As simple as that. A new complaint may be filed by February 6, 2026, lawfully and with due process, at doon na po natin magagamit, Senator Kiko Pangilinan, yung ating mga gown at robe. Kasi sigurado, as the day will shine tomorrow, there will be an impeachment case filed against her. And we will be ready. This time, we will be prepared and follow the due process that was mentioned by the Supreme Court. I speak, Mr. President, as someone who's been a legislator for over 2 decades now, together with the Senate President, long enough to know that our fragile democracy rests on the strength of our laws, that our freedoms are given shape by our rules and traditions. And you all know me as a stickler for rules and traditions, together with my minority leader. I have served in both houses, House of Representatives and the Senate, and here in the Senate, being formerly a majority leader, the Senate President, and now your Deputy Minority Leader. In all these roles, Mr. President, I've been conscientious in adhering to the rules and traditions that protect the integrity of our beloved institution. It is in this spirit that I adhere to the court's decision. My vote today is based on the Supreme Court's decision last July 25, 2025, without prejudice to whatever resolution it may later render on the motion for consideration. That's why I thank the good movement, Mr. President, to allow me to amend or to allow the amendment of his motion to make it a mere archiving of the document, because that will never stop us from being able to pull out that document from the archives. Maraming salamat sa ating mahal na movement, si Senator Marcoleta. Let me just say this, Mr. President, to end my manifestation and my vote. Restraint is not weakness. It is obedience to constitutional order. Let us act not in defiance of, but in deference to the Constitution, to the Supreme Court, and to the people who have entrusted us these powers in this very chamber. Daghan kay salamat sa ako mga kaigsunan, and may God bless us all. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Zubiri. With 19 affirmative votes, 4 negative votes, 1 abstention, the motion of Senator Marcoleta as amended by Senator Joel Villanueva adhering to the immediately executory decision rendered by the Supreme Court en banc on July 25, 2025, which among others held that the articles of impeachment are null and void ab initio, and that the Senate did not acquire jurisdiction, and to move to transfer the articles of impeachment in relation to case number 002-2011 entitled "In the Matter of the Impeachment Trial of Vice President Sara Zimmerman Duterte" to the archives. The same is hereby approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, Senator Bam Aquino would like to insert his explanation of vote into the record.
So inserted as requested by Senator Bam Aquino
And
into
together
the
with
records,
Senator J.V. Ercito.
as well as that of Senator J.V. Ercito. What is the pleasure of the Honorable Pangilinan?
Yes, just a parliamentary inquiry, Mr. President. If I recall, in previous votes, we first get the results of the vote before we go through an explanation of the vote. It seems like we have changed the process of voting.
That was upon the motion of Senator Zubiri earlier, which the chair explained before we put the matter to a vote.
I raised this question because the reason why, at least this was, the votes first before the explanation is that at times when there are contentious voting, the quorum may suddenly disappear, or there will no longer be a quorum because of the long process of voting. So
The gentleman is correct unless a member asks that the procedure we just adopted is instead followed, and in this particular instance, the Honorable Zubiri moved without objection from any member, hence the procedure that we adopted.
Mr. President,
Senator Zubiri,
therefore, that motion that I made was only for today. We can
That
go back
is-
to traditional
that
practice.
is the understanding.
Thank you very
You're
much,
correct,
Mr.
Senator Zubiri.
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader.
Majority Floor Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, some administrative matters, Mr. President. May I move, Mr. President, that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 5th session, Tuesday, August 5, 2025, and consider the same as approved. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion of the majority leader is approved.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body and noting that for some measures, this shall lead to a third committee referral, and upon consultation with the minority and conformity of the chairperson of the Committee on Games and Amusement, I move for the secondary committee referral and or change
Okay,
of
guys,
secondary
lipat na
committee
kayo
referral
kay,
as the case may be on the
Pilibro,
following
at
measures concerning
i-end ko na muna to, no?
anti-online gambling,
Thank you so
to the
much sa
Committee
mga
on Banks,
nagstay at
Financial
nakinig sa
Institutions,
explanation
and
of votes
currencies,
ng mga
while the
senator, no?
prior secondary
Para sa
referrals
impeachment
will
ni
now be
ano,
third committee referral.
Vice President
This is
Sara.
in view of the measures implications
Thank you so much.
on the
Bye-bye.
financial and banking system, particularly with respect to fund transfers and other